2019. I was a junior in high school, only 17 years old, and was just trying to get through. I was a diligent student. I slacked off and stayed up late watching my favorite shows, but I never really took school seriously. I quit track due to anxiety and laziness. I always watched the news, and I was arrogant and annoying, and I was just kind of an idiot when it came to politics. Then the first case of coronavirus entered the United States. It started in China with one case, isolated, they said. Then the president said it again. It was isolated and wasn't a problem. Then 1 to 10 to 50 to 100 to 1,000. I often joked in class that we should shut down the nation early. To be honest, I just wanted no school for maybe a week or two, especially in March with an early spring break. At least that's what I'd like to call it. My English teacher often laughed at my jokes. She didn't want school to shut down. We had way too much to do before summer. Unfortunately, what turned out to be satire became a joke about how it would become one of the biggest hypotheticals in modern history. What if the government shut down 2 weeks early? What if we took it seriously? Haven't we seen this all before, though? Lockdowns, masks, a large pandemic? Well, you would happen to be right. In the influenza pandemic of 1918 through 1920, America saw one of the worst events in its history, greater than that of the Korean, Vietnam, and World War II casualties all combined. The first reports started in March 1918 during the German Spring Offensive of World War I. As the war ended, the virus spread, even though most of the country had already been shut down by late 1918. A lot of people speculated that the virus had actually originated in Spain, hence the Spanish flu as it would later be called. However, it would actually originate in Kansas, the United States. As soldiers and celebrations arose, the virus quickly spread, even to President Woodrow Wilson himself, who was infected while he attended peace talks in Paris. As a result of the rampant spread of the flu, an estimated 600,000 Americans died because of influenza. Even masks were worn to try and prevent the disease, and nurses and doctors were also pushed to the brink. However, the same tragedy would happen again almost 100 years later. COVID-19 is a disease caused by SARS-CoV-2 virus. COVID-19 most often causes respiratory symptoms that can feel much like a cold, the flu, or even pneumonia. COVID-19 may attack more than your lungs and respiratory system. Other parts of your body also lay at risk and might be affected by the disease. Most people with COVID-19 have mild symptoms, but some people become severely ill. The most widespread coronavirus to date was discovered in Wuhan, China in November 2019, and the disease it causes is named coronavirus disease. The disease was a class of epidemics with human-to-human transmission caused by acute respiratory syndrome in the coronavirus 2 strand. Now that you know what COVID-19 actually does, I'm going to walk you through where it actually came from. So as I said earlier, it came from a lab within Wuhan, China in 2019. Many scientists still believe that this came from animal contact, such as a bat or a camel, as in some cases were believed to be transported by these animals in both Asia and Africa. While it was also being tested in Wuhan, the cause of the outbreak is still unknown. Many suspect that it was a breach within the lab itself that transmitted to another person through the animals at the facility and then spread over time. However, some scientists also identify it as zoonotic infection, which is the spread of a virus from animal to human. However, experts to this day still don't understand how this came to be, and a lot of information is still shrouded in mystery. Moving on, I'm going to be talking about Trump's handling of the pandemic at the start and throughout the end of his presidency, as well as warp speed. So, first, in 2020, he had established a coronavirus task force to manage the administration's response efforts and launch Operation Warp Speed, which successfully saw 2 safe and effective coronavirus vaccines in distribution by the end of 2020. However, this process was extremely slow at the start. Lockdown was also initiated in March 15, 2020, while many states had not given the order by this point and had only done it 3 to 4 days after the initial stated lockdown. In April 10th, nearly a month later in 2020, with over 18,000 confirmed deaths and more than 500,000 confirmed cases in under 4 months, the U.S. is the country with the most reported COVID-19 cases and deaths, surpassing Italy and Spain as a global hotspot for the virus. Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines that would later be developed as per the Warp Speed initiative were finally approved by the CDC in late 2020 and were then being mass produced. During this time as well, stimulus checks were also sent out by December 31st, 2020 at unprecedented speeds, even though there was significant roadblocks within the passing of this legislation. Although the national debt had soared at an increase of $5 billion per year compared to the only $1 billion per year from 2019 to 2020, families were still getting the needed checks that were crucial in helping their families not lose their homes, and help with rent, which did not freeze for many Americans. The economic crisis had always developed, and massive employment spiked as a result throughout the rest of his term as well as the Biden administration's. Unfortunately, massive panic and misinformation and distrust for the CDC had emerged due to Trump's overall rhetoric and disagreements with Anthony Fauci. Constant media coverage as well gave Americans a massive sense of pessimism as death and infections had become worse in any nation, or more than any nation on the planet, including that of China. However, it is debatable that China's numbers were actually correct. Next, I'm going to be talking about one of the key factors into how this pandemic played out and the main person that had been running it toward the beginning and the end of the entire pandemic. Dr. Anthony Fauci was head of the CDC, and he had been there for many years, including during the AIDS pandemic during the 1980s, even though he wasn't the actual head of the CDC. Overall, he pushed for vaccines and helped enforce and educate the American public, but his conflicts with Trump made many Americans untrustworthy, and a political divide was evident among many. Although blue and red states ultimately had succumbed to the mask and vaccine mandates, it raised massive constitutional concerns as to how long this lockdown would actually last, as well as confusion as to where the virus had originated from and how to confront it. He would later admit that he underestimated the healthcare delivery systems, and many states had taken years for the statewide access to vaccines to even after Warp Speed had ended and communication was even strained during this time. While red and blue states differed in overall vaccinations and deaths and infections, he admitted that this was a miscalculation and how the government could have responded better to these worries and the vaccine rollout that was slowed until Biden's presidency. When Biden was elected in the tumultuous 2020 presidential election, U.S. reports had nearly stated that 1 million new COVID-19 infections, the highest daily total of any country in the world, when he took office. The number of hospitalized COVID-19 patients had also risen nearly 50% in just 1 week. The administration stood up the largest free vaccination campaign in U.S. history, mobilizing 90,000 vaccination locations, standing up mass vaccination sites with the ability to administer more than a combined 125,000 shots a day, deploying over 9,000 federal personnel to support vaccinations nationwide, including over 5,000 active duty troops. By the time he took office, more than 300,000 had already died due to COVID. However, death toll figures under both the Trump and Biden administrations aren't directly comparable because Biden had been in office for a longer period of time since the virus emerged compared to Trump. Once we account, however, for the duration of each administration, the weekly COVID-19 mortality rate was lower on average during the period during Biden's presidency. However, the virus did not take its full widespread effect even during the lockdown until a year later, when it just completely exploded and went from person to person, even though a large part of the country had already been shut down. Even though death had increased under Biden, this was when the Johnson & Johnson and other vaccines had been pushed out to every part of the country, even though the progress was just as slow as the Trump administration's, and even after states had met their vaccination quota to reopen, many states decided to stay on lockdown, with Biden approving of these conditions with no actual end in sight. President Biden also set out on an ambitious goal to get 100 million vaccines in people's arms in 100 days. The administration had reached this goal in half the time and then achieved the 200 million vaccines within 100 days. By the end of his presidency, 230 million Americans are now vaccinated, and up to 3.5 million when President Biden had actually taken office. As of September 2024, COVID-19 was responsible for 1.2 million deaths in the United States, with the majority of those deaths occurring during Biden's presidency. The disease did not affect mostly young people. They were actually the least susceptible to this disease and were actually the transmitters on a large scale. It was the elderly that actually suffered a majority of the COVID deaths, getting up to that 1.2 million mark. Other important considerations are the George Floyd protests and the January 6 riots. As the pandemic was raging, two of the biggest events happened in only a year time frame. In the aftermath of George Floyd's death, massive protests erupted during election year, which not only helped spread the virus, but caused massive chaos and panic in a society that was already struggling. The January 6th insurrection was just an affirmation of this, and was also a moment in history that has never happened before. After President Trump's disputed election loss, a large group of protesters stormed the Capitol building in a chance to overturn Biden's election results. While this was not directly linked to the pandemic, both of these horrendous riots showed the state of the decline and massive panic that resided in the majority of the nation and the difficulties of the 21st century. Education during lockdown and its impact as well. The mental health in student and adolescents had plummeted significantly as students were forced to spend their days inside. Not only did social capital among adolescents suffer dramatically, so did the quality and efficiency of teaching and education as students tried to adjust to this new style of learning within less than a month of when the pandemic had actually started. And I remember this very well. During the first full year of the pandemic, there was a significant increase in clinically depressed children and adolescents. However, only about 20% of U.S. adolescents were diagnosed with major depression disorder received adequate treatment. According to a Harvard University study, students in both math and science within fourth grade level had decreased substantially compared to 2019 levels nationwide. This leads me into the vaccination dilemma. These dilemmas included the false death and illness rates, claims that vaccine caused infertility, and conspiracy theories that the vaccine contained magnetic 5G tracking microchips or altered one's DNA. Such false information caused many people to hesitate or refuse to be vaccinated. President Trump's bleach comments had also received massive criticism among most media outlets. However, he claims to have said that he was being sarcastic. However, this only elevated the fire of the misinformation that was going on at the time. Biden's distrust in Trump as well also worsened the situation, as many Republican states and Trump voters had refused to get vaccinated. Vaccine mandates in order to grocery shop for essentials was also being pushed by certain states, although it never went into national effect. However, a large majority of citizens had to be vaccinated in order to work special jobs such as in the medical field, the military, and other specific jobs. Regarding the ethical and moral dilemmas, saying to the public and Western world that everything was fine and good was not the greatest decision in trying to keep America under control and not start a widespread panic that we saw at the beginning of 2020. Vaccine mandates for soldiers and citizens on such short notice could have potential disastrous consequences, as there is no long-term data to show that there aren't any long-term side effects. However, side effects have not been proven as of now. Locking down millions and millions of Americans with no proper medical procedures in place or actual plan, because they didn't have one for over a century, was also a disaster and caused probably a lot more harm than it should have caused. The other part is that the reckless spending in research and medical necessities, but not because of the spending, but because of government mismanagement of these funds, caused massive inflation and the national debt to only worsen the economic problems associated with the pandemic that we still have not recovered from. In conclusion, the overall pandemic changed the nation in so many damaging ways. Political division has been at an unprecedented high regarding the riots and January 6th, as well as the political divide and mistrust between parties. The trust within government has also been strained, and those who swore to have to protect us during these times of need damaged their reputation substantially. And massive panic showed how the American resolve is unfortunately deterred, and showed how easy it was for our nation to attack one another in our time of need. Blaming and the lack of accountability for both China and the medical professionals for the slow rollout of the medical needs that people needed, and the presidential figures has left this incident without the answers necessary to explain the deaths of over 1 million Americans. Thank you for watching my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed, and good luck with the final. I'll see you next.